Allan's Wife, Chapter 13. What happened to Stella? The fight was over. In all, we had lost 7 men killed and several more severely bitten, while but few had escaped without some tokens whereby he might remember what a baboon's teeth and claws are like. How many of the brutes we killed, I never know, because we did not count, but it was a vast number. I should think that the stock must have been low about Babyan's peak for many years afterwards. From that day to this, however, I have always avoided baboons, feeling more afraid of them than any beast that lives. The path was clear, and we rushed forward along the watercourse. But first we picked up little Tota. The child was not in a swoon, as I had thought, but paralyzed by terror, so that she could scarcely speak. Otherwise she was unhurt, though it took her many a week to recover her nerve. Had she been older, and had she not remembered Henrika, I doubt if she would have recovered it. She knew me again and flung her little arms about my neck, clinging to me so closely that I did not dare to give her to anyone else to carry her, lest I should add to her terrors. So I went on with her in my arms. The fears that pierced my heart may well be imagined. Should I find Stella living or dead? Should I find her at all? Well, we should soon know. We spread ourselves out in a line, searching everywhere, for Tota was too overcome to be able to tell us where Stella was hidden away. For nearly half an hour, we searched and searched, scanning the walls of rock for any possible openings to a cave. In vain, we could find none. I applied to old Indaba Zimbi, but his foresight was a fault here, and all could say was that this was the place, and that the star was hidden somewhere in a cave, but where the cave was he could not tell. At last we came to the top. There before us was a wall of rock, of which the lower parts were here and there clothed in grasses and creepers. I walked along it, calling at the top of my voice. Presently my heart stood still, for I thought I heard a faint answer. I drew nearer to the place from which the sound seemed to come, and again called. Yes, there was an answer in my wife's voice. It seemed to come from the rock. I went up to it and searched among the creepers, but still could find no opening. "Move the stone," cried Stella's voice. "The cave is shut with a stone." I took a spear and prodded at the cliff whence the sound came. Suddenly the spear sunk in through a mass of lichen. I swept the lichen aside, revealing a boulder that had been rolled into the mouth of an opening in the rock, which it fitted so accurately that, covered as it was by the overhanging lichen, it might well have escaped the keenest eye. We dragged the boulder out. It was 2 men's work to do it. Beyond was a narrow, water-worn passage, which I followed with a beating heart. Presently the passage opened into a small cave, shaped like a pickle bottle, and coming to a neck at the top end. We passed through and found ourselves in a second, much larger cave, that I at once recognized as the one which Indaba Zimbi had shown me a vision in the water. Light reached it from above. How I know not, and by it I could see a form half sitting, half lying on some skins at the top end of the cave. I rushed to it. It was Stella bound with strips of hide, bruised, torn, but still Stella and alive. She saw me and gave me one cry. Then, as I caught her in my arms, she fainted. It was happy indeed that she did not faint before, for had it not been for the sound of her voice, I do not believe we should ever have found that cunningly hidden cave, unless indeed Indabazimbi's magic, on which be blessings, had come to our assistance. We bore her to the open air, laid her beneath the shade of a tree, and cut the bonds loose from her ankles. As we went, I glanced at the cave. It was exactly as I had seen in the vision. There burned the fire. There were the rude wooden vessels, one of them still half full of the water which I had seen the baboon bring. I felt awed as I looked, and marveled at the power wielded by a savage who could not even read and write. Now I could see Stella clearly. Her face was scratched and haggard with fear and weeping. Her clothes were almost torn off her, and her beautiful hair was loose and tangled. I sent for water, and we sprinkled her face. Then I forced a little of the brandy which we distilled from peaches at the crowns between her lips, and she opened her eyes, and throwing her arms about me, clung to me as little Tota had done, sobbing, "Thank God!" After a while she grew quieter, and I made her and Tota eat some of food from the store that we had brought with us. I too ate and was thankful, for with the exception of the mealy cobs I had tasted nothing for nearly 24 hours. Then she washed her face and hands, and tidied her rags of dress as well as she was able. As she did so by degrees, I drew her story from her. It seemed that on the previous afternoon, being wearied with packing, she went out to visit her father's grave, taking Tota with her, and was followed there by the two dogs. She wished to lay some flowers on the grave and take farewell of the dust it covered. For as we had expected to trek early on the morrow, she did not know if she would find a later opportunity. They passed up the garden, and gathering some flowers from the orange trees and elsewhere, went on to the little graveyard. Here she laid them on the grave as we had found them, and then sitting down, fell into deep and sad reverie, such as the occasion would naturally induce. While she sat thus, Tota, who was a lively child and active as a kitten, stayed away without Stella observing it. With her went the dogs, who also had grown tired of inaction. A while passed, and suddenly she heard the dogs barking furiously about 150 yards away. Then she heard Tota scream, and the dogs also yelling with fear and pain. She rose and ran as swiftly as she could towards the spot whence the sound came. Presently she was there. Before her in the glade, holding the screaming Tota in her arms, was a figure in which, notwithstanding the rough disguise of baboon skins and coloring matter, she had no difficulty in recognizing Henrika, and all about her were numbers of baboons rolling over and over in two hideous heaps, of which the centers were the unfortunate dogs, now in the process of being rent to fragments. "Hendrika," Stella cried, "what does this mean? What are you doing with Tota and those brutes?" The woman heard her and looked up. Then Stella saw that she was mad. Madness stared from her eyes. She dropped the child, which instantly flew to Stella for protection. Stella clasped it, only to be herself clasped by Henrika. She struggled fiercely, but it was of no use. The Babian Frau had the strength of 10. She lifted her and Tota as though they were nothing, and ran off with them, following the bed of the stream in order to avoid leaving a spoor. Only the baboons who came with her, minus the one the dogs had killed, would not take to the water, but kept pace with them on the bank. Stella said that the night which followed was more like a hideous nightmare than a reality. She was never able to tell me all that occurred in it. She had a vague recollection of being borne over rocks and along cliffs, while around her echoed the horrible grunts and clicks of baboons. She spoke to Hendrika in English and Kaffir, imploring her to let them go, but the woman, if I may call her so, seemed in her madness to have entirely forgotten these tongues. When Stella spoke, she would kiss her and stroke her hair, but she did not seem to understand what it was she said. On the other hand, she could and did talk to the baboons, that seemed to obey her implicitly. Moreover, she would not allow them to touch either Stella or the child in her arms. Once one of them tried to do so, and she seized a dead stick and struck it so heavily on the head that it fell senseless. Thrice Stella made an attempt to escape, for sometimes even Henrika's giant strength waned and she had to set them down. But on each occasion she caught them, and it was in these struggles that Stella's clothes were torn off. At length, before daylight, they reached the cliff, and with the first break of light, the ascent began. Enrica dragged them up the first stages, but when they came to the place, she tied the strips of hide, of which she had a supply wound round her waist. Beneath Stella's arms, steep as the place was, the baboons ascended it easily enough, springing from a knock of rock to the trunk of the tree that grew on the edge of the crevasse. Enrica followed them, holding the end of the hide rein in her teeth, one of the baboons hanging down from the tree to assist her ascent. It was while she was ascending that Stella bethought of letting fall her handkerchief in the faint hope that some searcher might see it. By this time Henrika was on the tree, and grunting out orders to the baboons, which clustered about Stella below. Suddenly these seized her and little Tota, who was in her arms, and lifted her from the ground. Then Henrika above, aided by other baboons, put out all her great strength and pulled the two of them up the rock. Twice Stella swung heavily against the cliff. After the second blow she felt her senses going, and was consumed with terror lest she should drop Tota. But she managed to cling to her, and together they reached the cleft. From that time, Stella went on. I remember no more till I woke to find myself in a gloomy cave, resting on a bed of skins. My legs were bound, and Henrika sat near me watching me, while around the edge of the cave peered the heads of those horrible baboons. Tota was still in my arms and half dead from terror. Her moans were pitiful to hear. I spoke to Henrika, imploring her to release us, but either she has lost all understanding of human speech, or she pretends to have done so. All she would do was to caress me, and even kiss my hands, and dress with the extravagant signs of affection. As she did so, Tota shrunk closer to me. This Henrika saw, and glared so savagely at the child that I feared lest she was going to kill her. I diverted her attention by making signs that I wanted water, and this she gave me in a wooden bowl. As you saw, the cave was evidently Henrika's dwelling place. There are stores of fruit in it and some strips of dried flesh. She gave me some of the fruit and Tota a little, and I made Tota eat some. You can never know what I went through, Allan. I saw now that Henrika was quite mad, and but little removed from the brutes to which she is akin, and over which she has such unholy power. The only trace of humanity left about her was her affection for me. Evidently, her idea was to keep me here with her, to keep me away from you, and to carry out This idea she was capable of exercise of every artifice and cunning. In this way she was sane enough, but in every other way she was mad. Moreover, she had not forgotten her terrible jealousy. Already I saw her glaring at Tota and knew that the child's murder was only a matter of time. Probably within a few hours she would be killed before my eyes. Of escape, even if I had the strength, there was absolutely no chance and little enough of our ever being found. No, we should be kept here guarded by a mad thing, half ape, half woman, till we perished miserably. Then I thought of you, dear, and all that you must be suffering, and my heart nearly broke. I could only pray to God that I might either be rescued or die swiftly. As I prayed, I dropped into a kind of doze from utter weariness, and then I had the strangest dream. I dreamed that Indaba Zimbi stood over me, nodding his white lock, and spoke to me in Kafir, telling me not to be frightened, for you would soon be with me, and that meanwhile I must humor Hendrika, pretending to be pleased to have her near me. The dream was so vivid that I actually seemed to see and hear him, and I see and hear him now. Here I looked up and glanced at old Indaba Zimbi, who was sitting near, but it was not till afterwards that I told Stella of how her vision was brought about. At any rate, she went on, when I awoke, I determined to act on my dream. I took Hendrika's hand and pressed it. She actually laughed in a wild kind of way with happiness, and laid her head upon my knee. Then I made signs that I wanted food, and she threw wood on the fire, which I forgot to tell you was burning in the cave, and began to make some of the broth that she used to cook very well. And she did not seem to have forgotten all about it. At any rate, the broth was not bad, though neither Tota nor I could drink much of it. Fright and weariness had taken away our appetite. After the meal was done, and I prolonged it as much as possible, I saw Hendrika was beginning to get jealous of Tota again. She glared at her and then at the big knife, which was tied around her own body. I knew the knife again. It was the one with which she had tried to murder you. At last she went so far as to draw the knife. I was paralyzed with fear. Then suddenly I remembered that when she was our servant and used to get out of temper and sulk, I could always calm her by singing to her. So I began to sing hymns. Instantly she forgot her jealousy and put the knife back into its sheath. She knew the sound of the singing and sat listening to it with a rapt face. The baboons too crowded in at the entrance of the cave to listen. I must have sung for an hour or more, all the hymns that I could remember. It was so very strange and dreadful, sitting there singing to Mad Hendrika and those hideous man-like apes that shut their eyes and nodded their great heads as I sang. It was a horrible nightmare, but I believe that the baboons are almost as human as the bushmen. Well, this went on for a long time till my voice was getting exhausted. Then suddenly I heard the baboons outside raise a loud noise, as they do when they are angry. Then, dear, I heard the boom of your elephant gun, and I think it was the sweetest sound that ever came to my ears. Indrika heard it too. She sprang up, stood for a moment, then, to my horror, swept Tota into her arms and rushed down the cave. Of course I could not stir to follow her, for my feet were tied. Next instant, I heard the sound of a rock being moved, and presently the lessening of the light in the cave told me that I was shut in. Now the sound even of the elephant gun only reached my reached me very faintly, and presently I could hear nothing more, straining my ears as I would. At last I heard a faint shouting that reached me through the wall of rock. I answered as loud as I could. You know the rest. And oh, my dear husband, thank God, thank God. And she fell weeping into my arms. Chapter 14. 15 years after. Both Stella and Tota were too weary to be moved, so we camped the night in the baboon's home, but were troubled by no baboons. Stella would not sleep in the cave. She said the place terrified her, so I made her up a kind of bed under a thorn tree. As this rock-bound valley was one of the hottest places I ever was in, I thought that this would not matter. But when at sunrise on the following morning I saw a veil of mist hanging over the surface of the ground, I changed my opinion. However, neither Stella nor Tota seemed the worse, so as soon as we practiced, we started homewards. I had already on the previous day sent some of the men back to the kraals to fetch a ladder, and when we reached the cliff, we found them waiting for us beneath. With the help of the ladder, the descent was easy. Stella simply got out of her rough litter at the top of the cliff, for we found it necessary to carry her, climbed down the ladder, and got again at the bottom. Well, we reached the kraals safely enough, seeing nothing more of Hendrika, and were this a story, doubtless I should end it here with and lived happily ever after. But alas, it is not so. How am I to write it? My dearest wife's vital energy seemed completely to fail her now that the danger was past, and within 12 hours of our return, I saw that her state was such as to necessitate the abandonment of any idea of leaving Babian kraals at present. The bodily exertion, the anguish of mind, and the terror which she had endured during that dreadful night, combined with her delicate state of health, had completely broken her down. To make matters worse, also, she was taken with the attack of fever, contracted no doubt in the unhealthy atmosphere of that accursed valley. In time, she took the fever off, but it left her dreadfully weak and quite unfit to face the trial before her. I think she knew that she was going to die. She always spoke of my future, never of our future. It is impossible for me to tell how sweet she was, how gentle, how patient and resigned. Nor indeed do I wish to tell it. It is too sad. But this I will say. I believe that if ever a woman drew near to perfection while yet living on the earth, Stella did so. The fatal hour drew on. My boy Harry was born, and his mother lived to kiss and bless him. Then she sank. We did what we could, but we had little skill, and might not hold her back from death. All through one weary night I watched her with a breaking heart. The dawn came, the sun rose in the east. His rays falling on the peak behind were reflected in glory upon the bosom of the western sky. Stella awoke from her swoon and saw the light. She whispered to me to open the door of the hut. I did so, and she fixed her dying eyes on the splendor of the morning sky. She looked on me and smiled as an angel might smile. Then, with a last effort, she lifted her hand and, pointing to the radiant heavens, whispered, "There, Allah, there. There, Allan, there." It was done, and I was broken-hearted, and broken-hearted I must wander to the end. Those who have endured my loss will know my sorrow. It cannot be written. In such peace and at such an hour may I also die. Yes, it is a sad story, but wonder where we will about the world, we can never go beyond the sound of the passing. For me, as for my Father before me, and for the millions who have been and who shall be, there is but one word of comfort. The Lord hath given, and the Lord hath taken away. Let us then bow our heads in hope, and add with a humble heart, Blessed be the name of the Lord. I buried her by her father's side, and the weeping of the people who had loved her went up to heaven. Even Dabazimbi wept, but I could weep no more. On the second night from her burial, I could not sleep. I rose, dressed myself, and went out into the night. The moon was shining brightly, and by its rays I shaped my course towards the graveyard. I drew near silently, and as I came, I thought that I heard a sound of moaning on the future side of the wall. I looked over it, crouched by Stella's grave, and tearing at its sods with her hands, as though she would unearth that which lay within, was Hendrika. Her face was though she would wild and haggard. Her form was so emaciated that when the plaits she wore slipped aside, the shoulder blades seemed to project almost through her skin. Suddenly she looked up and saw me. Laughing a dreadful maniac laugh, she put her hand to her girdle and drew her great knife from me. I thought she was about to attack me and prepared to defend myself as I best could, for I was unarmed, but she made no effort to do so. Lifting the knife on high, for a moment she held it glittering in the moonlight, then plunged it into her own breast and fell headlong to the ground. I sprang over the wall and ran to her. She was not yet dead. Presently she opened her eyes, and I saw that the madness had gone out of them. Macumazahn, she said, speaking in English and in a thick, difficult voice, like one who half forgot and half remembered. Macumazahn, I remember now. I have been mad. Is she really dead, Macumazahn? Yes, I said, she's dead, and you killed her. I killed her, the dying woman faltered. And I loved her. Yes, I know now. I became a brute again and dragged her into the brutes. And now once more I am a woman, and she is dead, and I killed her, because I loved her so. I killed her who saved me from the brutes. I'm not dead yet, Macumazahn. Take me and torture me to death, slowly, very slowly. It was jealousy of you that drove me mad, and I have killed her, and now she never can forgive me. Ask forgiveness from above, I said, for Hendrika had been a Christian, and the torment of her remorse touched me. I asked no forgiveness, she said. May God torture me forever because I killed her. May I become a brute forever till she comes to find me and forgives me. I only want her forgiveness. And wailing in an anguish of the heart so strong that her bodily suffering seemed to be forgotten, Hendrika, the baboon woman, died. I went back to the kraals, and waking in Dabazimbi, told him what had happened, asking him to send someone to watch the body, as I proposed to give it burial. But next morning it was gone, and I found that the natives, hearing of the event, had taken the corpse and thrown it to the vultures with every mark of hate. Such then was the end of Hendrika. A week after Hendrika's death, I left Babian Kraals. The place was hateful to me now. It was a haunted place. I sent for old Indaba Zimbi and told him that I was going. He answered that it was well. The place has saved your turn, he said. Here you have won that joy which it had fated you should win, and have suffered those things that it was fated you should suffer. Yes, and though you know it not now, the joy and the suffering, like the sunrise and storm, are the same thing, and will rest at last in the same heaven, the heaven from which they came. Now go, Macumazahn. I asked him if he was coming with me. No, he answered. Our paths lie apart, Macumazahn. We met together for certain ends. Those ends are fulfilled. Now each one goes his own way. You have still many years before you, Macumazahn. My years are few. When we shake hands here, it will be for the last time. Perhaps we may meet again, but it will not be this world. Henceforth, we have each of us a friend, the least. Heavy words, I said. True words, he answered. Well, I have little heart to write the rest of it. I went, leaving Indaba Zimbi in charge of the place, and making him a present of such cattle and goods as I did not want. Tota, I, of course, took with me. Fortunately, by this time, she had almost recovered the shock to her nerves. The baby Harry, as he was afterwards named, was a fine, healthy child, and I was lucky in getting a respectable native woman whose husband had been killed in the fight with the baboons to accompany me as his nurse. Slowly and followed for a distance by all the people, I trekked away from Babian Kraals. My road towards Natal was along the edge of the Badlands, and my first night's outspan was beneath that very tree where Stella, my lost wife, had found us as we lay dying of thirst. I did not sleep much that night, and yet I was glad that I had not died in the desert about 11 months before. I felt then, as if from year to year, I have continued to feel, while I wandered through the lonely wilderness of life, that I had been preserved to the end. I had won my darling's love, and for a little while we had been very happy together. Our happiness was too perfect to endure. She is lost to me now, but she is lost to be found again. Here on the following morning, I made farewell to Indaba Zimbi. Goodbye, Macumazahn, he said, nodding his white lock at me. Goodbye for a while. I'm not a Christian. Your father could not make me that, but he was a wise man, and when he said that those who loved each others shall meet again, he did not lie. And I, too, am a wise man in my way, Macumazahn, and I say it is true that we shall meet again. All my prophecies to you have some truth, Macumazahn, and this one shall come true also. I tell you that you shall return to Babian Kraals and shall not find me. I tell you that you shall journey to a further land than Babian Kraals and shall find me. Farewell. And he took a pinch of snuff, turned and went. Of my journey down to Natal, there is little to tell. I met with many adventures, but they were of an everyday kind, and in the end arrived safely at Port Dorban, which I now visited for the first time. Both Tota and my baby boy bore the journey well, and here I may as well chronicle the destiny of Tota. For a year she remained under my charge. Then she was adopted by a lady, the wife of an English colonel, who was stationed at the Cape. She was taken by her adopted parents to England, where she grew up a very charming and pretty girl, and ultimately married a clergyman in Norfolk. But I never saw her again, though we often wrote to each other. Before I returned to the country of my birth, she too had been gathered to the land of shadows, leaving 3 children behind her. Ah me, all this took place so long ago, when I was young, who now I am old. Perhaps it may interest the reader to know the fate of Mr. Carson's property, which should of course have gone to his grandson Harry. I wrote to England to come to claim the estate on his behalf, but the lawyer to whom the matter was submitted said that my marriage to Stella, not having been celebrated by any ordained priest, was not legal according to English law, and therefore Harry could not inherit. Foolishly enough, I acquainted this, and the property passed to a cousin of my father-in-law's. But since I have come to live in England, I have been informed that this opinion is open to great suspicion, and that there is every probability that the courts would have declared the marriage perfectly binding, as having been solemnly entered into in accordance with the custom of the place where it was contracted. But I am not now so rich that it is not worth while to move in the matter. The cousin is dead, his son is in possession, so let him keep it. Once and once only did I revisit Babiani Kraals, some 15 years after my darling's death. When I was a man in middle life, I undertook an expedition to the Zambes, and one night outspanned at the mouth of the well-known valley beneath the shadows of Great Peak. I mounted my horse and quite alone rode up the valley, noticing with a strange prescience of evil that the road was overgrown, and save for the music of the waterfalls, the place silent as death. The kraals that used to be to the left of the road by the river had vanished. I rode towards their sides. The mealy fields were choked with weeds. The paths were dumb with grass. Presently I reached the place. There, overgrown with grass, were the burnt ashes of the kraals, and there among the ashes, gleaming the moonlight, lay the white bones of men. Now it was clear to me. The settlement had been fallen on by some powerful foe, and its inhabitants put to the assegai. The foreboding of the natives had come true. Babiani kraals were peopled by memories alone. I passed on up the terraces. There shone the roofs of the marble huts. They would not burn, and were too strong to be easily pulled down. I entered one of them. It had been our sleeping hut, and lit a candle which I had with me. The huts had been sacked. Leaves of books and broken mouldering fragments of the familiar furniture lay about. Then I remembered that there was a secret place hollowed in the floor and concealed by a stone, where Stella used to hide her little treasures. I went to the stone and dragged it up. There was something within wrapped in rotten native cloth. I undid it. It was the dress my wife had been married in. In the center of the dress were the withered wreath and flowers she had worn, and with them a little paper packet. I opened it. It contained a lock of my own hair. I remember then that I had searched for this dress when I came away, and could not find it, for I had forgotten the secret recess in the floor. Taking the dress with me, I left the hut for the last time, leaving my horse tied to a tree. I walked to the graveyard, through the ruined garden. There it was, a mass of weeds, but over my darling's grave grew a self-sown orange bush, of which the scented petals fell in showers on the mound beneath. As I drew near, there was a crash and a rush. A great baboon leapt from the center of the graveyard and vanished into the trees. I could almost believe that it was the wraith of Hendrika, doomed to keep an eternal water over the bones of the woman her jealous rage had done to death. I tarried there a while, filled with such thoughts as may not be written. Then, leaving my dead wife to her long sleep, where the waters fall in melancholy music beneath the shadow of the everlasting mountain, I turned and saw that spot where first we had told our love. Now the orange grove was nothing but a tangled thicket. Many of the trees were dead, choked with creepers, but some still flourished. There stood the one beneath which we had lingered. There was the rock that had been our seat, and there on the rock sat the wraith of Stella, the Stella whom I had wed. There she sat, and on her upturned face was that same spiritual look which I saw upon it in the hour when we first had kissed. The moonlight shone in her dark eyes, the breeze wavered in her curling hair, her breast rose and fell, a gentle smile played about her parted lips. I stood transfixed with awe and joy, gazing on that lost loveliness which once was mine. I could not speak, and she spoke no word. She did not even seem to see me. Now her eyes fell. For a moment they met mine, and their message entered into me. Then she was gone. She was gone. Nothing was left but the tremulous moonlight falling where she had been, the melancholy music of the waters, the shadow of the everlasting mountain, and in my heart the sorrow and the hope.